Let me convene the meeting this evening, and I will be convening our city council with 7 members present. We have 2 members present from the Finance Advisory Committee, which does not constitute a quorum of Finance Advisory. So the 2 members of Finance Advisory Committee will be participating as part of public comment this evening. With that, let me ask for a roll call of council.
Jacobson? Present. Nukin?
Here.
Markwart?
Here.
Snow?
Here.
Noriko?
Here.
Baker? O'Leary?
Here.
Ray?
Present?
7 present.
7. And I have not heard from Alderman Baker, so I would expect he may join us in progress. And let me clarify, I will be asking the 2 members of Finance Advisory Committee to participate in our discussion as you might choose. With my original intent was to convene this as a joint meeting without a quorum of Finance Advisory. I'll let the 2 of you participate in our discussion. Okay, with that, we'll move to wrap up and final recommendations.
Sure.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. First item is Finance Director Kathy Haley is going to give an overview of what has been covered tonight and what we are seeking direction on either tonight or our recommendation for handling the discussion of some of the items at subsequent meetings, at future meetings. So Director Haley is going to give an overview, and then as she gets into the general fund, I'm going to jump in with further clarification and addressing a specific question by Alderman Snow several meetings ago. So with that, Director Haley.
Okay, thank you. First, I want to start out by stating that this current proposed budget that's been presented to the City Council and the Finance Advisory Committee is presented as a balanced budget. We're showing a small surplus of $77,033. We have proposed the FY16 budgeted expenditures lower than the FY15 budgeted dollars by $582,863, and revenues higher than fiscal year 15 by $37,923. Of course, we all know the future potential cuts by the governor's office could impact the position of this budget greatly. Staff would recommend passing this budget with the clause that if the state's budget has significant impact on reducing the LGDF revenue source for the city, that staff come back with proper recommendations to address this concern that would bring for the fiscal 16 budget.
And if I could just add to emphasize, the recommendation in regards to any new items that is in the general fund budget or any of the budgets, whether it's staffing, vehicles, equipment, technology, none of that would be purchased prior to a resolution coming in Springfield in regards to their budget. So we would not move forward on those. If there is any LGDF reduction, we would come back, and then one of the directions we're seeking from the council is in what avenue would you want that? Would you want that to City Council, or would you want to reconvene another City Council joint Finance Advisory Committee meeting? So just to emphasize, we would not move forward on any of those until we know what's happening in Springfield on their budget.
So while it is apparent that operating expenditures are outpacing current operating revenues, the future holds many uncertainties for these revenues. Revenues could begin to trend up with the economy. The unemployment rate has been dropping, which increases our income tax revenue. The nature of internet sales and its effect on local use tax has been very positive over the last several years. Hotel-motel revenue has been rising. The potential for the state to tax services, which would provide more revenue to local municipalities, could also be another factor based on the state's budget. These are all positive impacts on revenue. In looking back at the 5-year projection 2 years ago, while it is a very good tool to note that these expenditures are outpacing revenues, I can see that revenues were understated by $2.6 million and expenditures differed by over $6.7 million. This shows while projecting out 3 to 5 years is a good tool, it is certainly not an exact look into the future. By knowing this outpacing of revenues versus expenditures, staff will continue to look for ways to streamline processes to help reduce expenditures and to look at alternate revenue options available to the city, not only to continue to present a balanced budget year after year, but to help continue to strive toward our 25% fund balance goal. These next items, staff will be bringing back in the future to discuss. None of these items are hinged upon passing the fiscal 16 budget. Staff will bring back discussion on alternate revenue sources to help fund the future needs of our streets, fleet, and equipment. Staff will do some homework based on feedback we have received at these meetings and input and suggestions by both committee members and council. Any other thoughts or suggestions that anyone has, please feel free to forward them on to me so that I can do research ahead of time. We will also be bringing recommendations regarding the airport to help turn this enterprise fund into a sustainable or a more sustainable entity. And finally, we will bring back the change of our fiscal budget year to a calendar fiscal year. As a reminder, we do have a public hearing on the budget scheduled for June 8th, and that's the first reading, with the second reading being on June 22nd. So with that, I've written a memo to kind of go through bullet points and step-by-step of some of the items that we've discussed during this process. First and foremost, if you don't have the memo, I think copies were provided for you. Anyone not have it? Okay. So first and foremost, the general fund. There were some items that I had noted at the May 12th meeting that were additions after the budget books were provided to the council and the committee. We eliminated a couple small expenditures. We incorporated a couple revenues that were left out. The Sycamore IGA is no longer being lumped into revenues, so that expenditure is now being included in expenditures. There was a transfer recalculation for debt, promotion lieutenants to commanders, and Lexipol for the police department. So that still leaves the general fund with the positive surplus of $77,033. Next are items that are either additions or new for fiscal 16. Please, if you have, stop me at any point in time if you want to discuss it, or we can move forward. But the first are the staffing changes in the general fund. And we have currently 5 staffing recommendations.
And with that, I'm going to jump in there. It was either maybe our first or second budget meeting. I know Alderman Snow had the question in regards to the 2 positions that were being recommended as far as the HR and IT director positions. And the question was that if there was only one director position, which would it be? And at that meeting, I indicated I would want more time. Actually, after that meeting, the executive team and I met to discuss that very question. We've also met again yesterday, and I've had a lot of one-on-one conversations with the department heads. The recommendation, not only coming from myself, but from the executive team, is if the council only wanted to move forward with one position, the recommendation would be the HR director and not the IT director. We would look at least our recommendation would be defer the IT director. I have listed in a memo some of the top 10 projects that if an HR director position was filled, and I should clarify, this is not a new position, that as a result of the pay and comp study, we had 2 people that were in positions, the HR director position, the IT director position, that as a result of the pay and comp study, verified that they were not performing the responsibilities of those positions, so their titles were reclassified. So they're still in the organization doing most of the work that they had been doing before, but it became very apparent that as far as the level of expectation for those positions, that those would require different personnel to be able to fulfill those. So staff's recommendation is really an outgrowth of the pay and comp study. Looking at that, based on some of the issues that I know the community is aware of and that the city has been addressing over the past year, there's a big need for HR. And I know some of the questions I've gotten from council members, as you've asked me in the past week or so, is yes, our assistant city manager does have an HR background. She was HR director for the village of Schaumburg and as well as HR in the private sector. But when I brought assistant city manager Hoppenstead on board, it was not because of her HR background. it was to fill the role of assistant city manager. There are many projects that are being delayed right now as far as those general responsibilities, which are on the flip side of the memo that's at your place this evening, that talks about what are some of the priorities that would be done. Right now, Assistant Manager Hoppenstead is working and guiding the strategic plan, working for the Center for Governmental Studies, but there's going to be an outgrowth of what we'd like to do is once we get those goals and objectives in place, we want to cascade all those goals and objectives down through the organization to specify either what department, what position, what person is responsible for implementing those, working with the council, and timelines associated with that. So that's an example of one of the things that is still going to get done. It's a matter of either how quickly or slowly it gets done. I can go more in specifics if you have any specific questions. Ultimately, if the council wanted to go in that direction, our recommendation would be to fill the HR director, and instead then of filling the IT director this year, is to do a strategic IT assessment and hire an outside firm, third party, that would basically provide a full picture of current IT environment. They would create a plan as far as what the city's goals and objectives and show areas of remediation, and also create a 3-year technology plan. We would also look for some operational technical assistance on project implementation. There was a concern internally as far as implementing some of the software programs or some of the IT items that are being recommended in the budget. We have stated in there, if the council goes in this direction, the savings to the general fund and the water fund would be $36,533 and $12,500 in fiscal year 16 budget, respectively. IT, these are two areas that we have a big need. But when you look at 78% of our budget or our costs come from our personnel and our employees, that we need to do more to be able to support those employees, and whether it's training, whether it's working with the department head on a work comp injury and how do we get that person back to work. There's a whole myriad of different issues and support that we would have. I would also add, if you have any questions, I know specifically any of the department heads are prepared to answer, as it relates to police and fire. I know the chiefs are prepared to answer. So I just wanted to jump in there to address Alderman Snow's question from several meetings ago. If there is a desire to only go with one position, executive team and I recommend HR director. Director Haley?
So at this point, I would open it up for questions on the general fund.
I have a
Alderperson
question
O'Leary.
about the two positions, the HR and the IT. So you answered the question, if you go with one. So what if we go with none of them? What is it going to look like if we go with no new HR or IT?
Then we will continue to operate in the way that we have in the past. There's a number of things that will not be addressed. We will not be as efficient as we can be, particularly on the HR side. I will give you an example, and perhaps the police chief wants to clarify. As an example, we've not been able to fill some of the positions in a timely manner in the police department. So when there's been a vacancy, such as in the telecommunicator position, it's taken us an inordinate time to be able to fill that. So will we continue to operate? Yes, we will, but we will not be operating at the highest and most efficient way. The same thing on the technology side. If we went with a plan, what this would be able to help us do is basically address, outline the technology that we have in place, but more importantly, help us identify what we need in place in the next couple of years. We have some idea, but it also provides more detailed assistance. So we'll get by.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Tom?
Thank you. I guess the Finance Advisory Committee was tasked to provide input and suggestions and recommendations to the City Council. In that regard, I think I have a series of recommendations based on analysis that has been performed, and I'd like to take some time to do that. First of all, I want to thank the staff. I spent some extra time with Kathy, maybe more than she had anticipated in trying to do an analysis. First off, as far as the budget being balanced and that whole discussion, there's been a series of accounting changes and one-time items that have been discussed throughout this whole process. And they've been brought out through various memos at various times, but until you sit back and do the analysis and put it all together at a single point in time, you really don't get the full impact. But let me read you a few, and you can jot them down as we go. For the 16 budget impact, I'm talking about one-time items and accounting changes, okay? So if we look at that, and most of these I've shared with Kathy, and we've gone over them to make sure there's at least some understanding, some consistent understanding of the accounting treatment. What is a change in accounting, what's a one-time item, what's a prior period adjustment, and some of these financial things. But without a full understanding of that, you really do not capture what is your basic operating costs and where you stand. So with that, items that are in the 16 budget that are posited to the general fund, and I'm really kind of limiting this to the general fund aspect at this point because that's where we are in our discussion. Work comp transfer to the general fund is, there's a one-time transfer occurs in 16 of $250,000. Okay, if you look in the budget transfers, you'll see $250,000, that's favorable in 16, and that's due to, as Kathy and I discussed that, and she's indicated, it's really due to lower excellent work comp experience in 15, okay? And it's ending up in 16. Now, you could put that in 15 if you so desired, but at this point, it's in the 16 budget. So that's $215,000. We've talked a lot about the accounting for water department and the transfers between and the recap of what's been done with water and so forth. There is a cost shift that was made to more correctly allocate costs, which has a net benefit to the general fund of about $117,000. And then in addition to that, there's $112,000 in additional fees and services that used to be in water that is now in the general fund, and that's associated with sanitary district billing revenue, as I understand it. So between those two, that's about $229,000 that's favorable to the general fund in 16 due to the accounting changes
All right.
associated with the water analysis.
Mr. Tarazinski,
Yes, sir.
you
Ma'am.
said 117. What was the other total?
112.
That 112 is not a one-time benefit,
No, it's
though,
a
that'll
cha-
be
it's an
ongoing.
accounting
Mhm.
change.
Yes,
So that's an accounting change. And the water department shift is truly an accounting change too, right?
Right.
Yeah. The closure of the Economic Development Fund and the transfer of that all into the general fund has a net positive impact in 16 of $125,000. And then the whole discussion about the airport subsidy, I have in there, I don't know if that's one time or not. I know there's a serious objective there to deal with that, and there has been a serious objective for the last 5 years to deal with it, and a lot of people have analyzed it and talked about it for 5 years. It's never been effectively changed substantially from a $200,000 deficit. In the 16 budget, there's a $200,000 cash operating deficit, and we've talked about that. If you just strip out the grants and the funds from the federal government and strip out the capital spending from the grants and the funds, if you strip that all out and just get to cash operations, it's about $200,000.
still, though, ending in a positive cash balance at the end of 16.
Yeah, and that's due to the 15 fund balance being $200,000. But the
Correct.
16 operating expense is truly a deficit. We're going to take that one-time benefit that we have this year and have value in that. And I understand the objective. I fully do. We've spent a lot of time in the past on trying to do what you're suggesting, and I hope so. But my point would be, let's not spend any money that we haven't earned through the changes that are being recommended. And I fully support the efforts to address the deficit in the airport fund. And if you wanted to take that out of this little thing, with that in it, it's $800,000. So when we say we have a $77,000 or approximately $100,000, that's true, but that includes all these items, some of which won't repeat. So in that respect, is my recommendation to our chair and for further recommendation to the council whenever we get to that point, would be to adjust the budget to a $700,000 to $750,000 surplus, which means you'd have to cut $700,000 or 2% out of the current expenditures. That would put you at a track to achieve your 25% sustainability goal. It would put the council in a much more meaningful position of having something sustainable with true operations and not be impacted by one-time items. Suggest freezing hiring at the current level. And if our revenues happen to exceed 3% or some target goal, then you might entertain additional positions. But in the meantime, understand the need to fill positions that are necessary, and that possibly in the past has come from people who have retired or quit, and then you readjust and say, my highest priority is that, and so be it. You backfill those high priority positions from the current staffing. So if that number is 220 or whatever the current actual staff is, that would be the recommendation. You know, the revenue potential might be better, but with the loss of Penny's, Barnes and Nobles, Big Lots, Duck Soup, it might go the other way. I mean, if those foundational key stores in those complexes need to get backfilled, or it could go the other way. I mean, somebody else might leave. That would be one fear. So to me, that's a high priority. And I would stop with that at this point. So those are my recommendations to the council. And I know we can't make any formal vote. I was hoping we would vote on these one by one, but I guess we're not able to do that. But I wanted to get them on the table for your discussion.
Why can't we vote?
Well, we can't make a formal vote. We were gonna make a vote we don't have a quorum. The Finance Advisory Committee does not.
Which, by the way, you need to fire 2 of the 7 people that never come, so then we don't have to go through this again. I was late because I was talking with
Okay, I have a
people
question
outside.
about something you said, Mr. Teraziski. You said you want us to freeze hiring at what?
At the current level.
At the current.
In other words, where we are today, I don't know if you have open budget positions at this point exactly from 15. So that could be a discussion. I mean, that really excluded that. I didn't know how many of those might be open. But I guess that really primarily deals with the 3 or 4 that are in the budget. And that, I think, it would get you close to that 700,000, 750,000. And I think that's what you need to have an opportunity for the 5-year forward analysis. So those are for discussion.
Correct, and I would note that the Finance Advisory Committee has expressed to me the desire to be able to give an independent recommendation to the City Council in a formal way, and if that means that we need to have another meeting by ourselves to be able to do that, there has been some interest in that being done.
And I would just ask, Mike, that you respect the planned calendar toward a public hearing and first reading of that budget on June 8th.
Correct, yes, absolutely.
Discussion on the items Thomas placed on the floor, or if you wish to discuss, Anne Marie address the HRIT positions.
I have one, can I? A couple things. I think staff has spent a lot of time on this budget, and we've really looked at it in depth and made some great modifications. We've made some cost cutting. I think it's our objective and mine, especially as finance director, to always balance the budget and to work towards that 25% fund balance goal while trying to provide the level of services that the residents of the city deserve and be fiscally responsible. So I think that's the budget we've presented and and did a pretty thorough analysis. With the one-time or the one-offs that Tom had talked about, which we did talk about, I think that I can say there's also one-time expenditures that are in this budget that don't have to be spent next year as well. So it's both sides of the coin. I mean, the objective is to present a budget that meets the goals of each department that they've set forth throughout the year. So I certainly appreciate and know that there are some one-offs. I also know that we have some pretty healthy reserves right now in our 3 internal service funds that, you know, I think I have a lot more analysis myself to do with the budget process. And I know that we can make more improvements as my tenure here goes on, hopefully. So we have a long way to go, but I do feel like we did a really thorough and a good job this year in going through it, making some good cuts and making some good additions and presenting the budget that we did. So, but we can go through these requests as well, or talk about the positions.
Sure, I would just add that as staff, when we prepared the budget, it was in keeping with the direction of the council. This goes back to not only March 15th of last year, but continued discussions with the council based on the 6 priorities that were identified previously: infrastructure, financial stability, sustainable operations, strategic planning, public safety, and regional airport. The regional airport issue is being addressed with the study that is being finalized, which will be coming to the council in the next couple of months as far as the structure of the airport moving forward. That'll be a policy decision of the council. Some of the items specifically that are recommended in the budget, as I'm looking at the 6 main items, do address specifically public safety as far as, and we can go into those specifics, whether it's the fire department intern, the promotion of a police officer to a detective sergeant, code red notification module. There are some specific items, camp power, that specifically relate to, and the police vehicles. Strategic planning, this is a continuation of the strategic plan that is currently in place. There are some other strategic planning initiatives that we've talked about. If you want to look at the umbrella of strategic planning, specifically the neighborhood 3 plans. This is the area of the community that was identified in the housing study, but basically we're looking at north of NIU and northwest of NIU, so the Annie Glidden, if I want to call it the Annie Glidden North Corridor, as well as dealing with Greek Row. This is an area in our conversations with NIU that I know it's an area that they recommend we address, and as we've talked about as staff, we also feel it's an important area. Sustainable operations. I mean, the reality, and we talked about this last year, that the way that the city has been doing business with the various funds is not sustainable. So not only was last year's budget or the current budget that we're under, but the budget that we're recommending is to provide a more sustainable system than what's been done in the past. And to be really blunt, the city has used TIF funds to support the general fund as well as capital, as streets. That can't continue. I mean, we know those TIF districts are phasing out, so the council has some policy decisions moving forward as to how to structure things as far as financial. Goes into financial stability. The two are interlinked, and infrastructure, which is a whole nother issue, which ties into whether it's the water system, the streets, the fleet. There are serious issues over the last 10 to 20 plus years of things that have been deferred. Now, as a policy decision, you can continue to defer those, but as staff, we feel both on the operational side as well as the capital side that this is almost the day of reckoning where we're trying to address them or at least highlight the issues. So, you know, I disagree with committee member Terzinski on some of his recommendations, but, you know, we will go with whatever the council determines as to how do you want to proceed forward. As staff, we put together a very workable budget that addresses all the needs of the community, whether it's on the staffing side or whether it's on training or planning or you name it. But we're here to answer any questions, and I'll encourage the department heads as we go through this presentation to jump in as well.
Alderman Snow.
Go a couple things. First of all, on the 2 new positions, the HR position and the IT position, just as a point of information, in fiscal year 16, we're budgeting 8 months because we're anticipating not filling those positions for 4 months. So for fiscal year 17, right off the bat, we're adding another $59,000 to those. So I guess I would have preferred to budget them at 12 months and then show us a savings, just like any other vacant position. It is, I think, a more straightforward way to do that. But it's also, you know, as far as, you know, I appreciate saying that we will hold off on these new expenditures until the state determines what they're going to do as far as funding cities. It's also going to depend on how permanent they make their funding. I mean, we all know how the state of Illinois works, and if they do a temporary fix, we may have funds for this coming year, but it's a temporary fix, and we don't know what's a year down the road. So I guess, you know, I need to know what they do before I feel too confident about expecting that money year after year after year. Because they may give it to us this year, but if it's a temporary fix, it may be gone the following year. So I know you mentioned, well, you are making some plans as far as budget cuts, and, you know, I hope that, you know, the staff behind the scenes anyway is looking at maybe even a 5% cut in expenditures if we get cut $2 million. Hopefully that doesn't occur, but I don't want it to be a last-minute decision either as to where we start cutting. So, you know, it's hard to identify those things, I realize that, but I think that the sooner maybe we start discussing those somewhat in the open with the public, so that they can, you know, if the worst-case scenario happens, they at least have some idea what direction we're going to be headed.
Alderperson Noriko.
This is my first time going through this process, and I've learned a great deal. And one perspective that I really firmly believe now is that we, you know, can't continue the way we have been, deferring maintenance, deferring repairs. Just like in a house, if you keep doing that, eventually you're going to have leaks and things falling down on you. So I recognize that we're going to have to make unpopular decisions, but I feel that's part of our responsibility, my responsibility. I was elected to do what is in the best interests of the city, and I'm pretty convinced that some of these structural issues have to be addressed, or we're just avoiding our responsibilities and pushing that responsibility off to future councils. Now, having said that, I see no way that everything can be accomplished or agreed to, but I do think, you know, at least making steps on the water issues, the street issues, capital, appropriate positions, and so forth, and you know, trying, you know, taking an honest look at the alternate revenue sources, which ones are reasonable and palatable and make sense at this time.
Other thoughts or discussion at this point? Tom?
Just to follow up, the comments and the input on the thoughts on these potential recommendations were associated with the general fund. They really did not address any of the capital issues. So the roads are not significantly impacted by this discussion on the general fund, nor are the water fund or per se as far as capital aspects of it in the comments on the operating costs. Because if our operating costs continue to exceed our revenues, which we've talked about the revenues being flat, and if you recall the presentation that the staff made early on, I think each of the primary departments in union negotiations of what's in the agreements, you know, if the police departments, whatever the number was, 230, 240, 240,000, and the fire is similar, and the rest of the group is similar, that's 700,000 right there. That's without medical cost increases, pension increases, and so forth. Your revenue increases are not going up $600,000 or $700,000 a year currently to enable you to even cover committed contractual obligations in some respects. So as you think about this from an operational standpoint, I think it's really necessary to segment the capital piece, and how any recommendations that come forward on that have not been part of what I put on the table at this point, and I'm not sure what the Finance Advisory Committee would do with those on incremental revenue at this point, particularly for capital needs. Mine is that I largely did not feel additional revenues are going to come from our current tax operations, our current base, and our growth in the community, which is nominal to nothing as far as growth. In fact, there's been some decline overall, and mean income stagnating to maybe an average decline slightly. We're not at St. Charles, and we're not at, the corridor, the Fox River corridor type levels. So it's difficult to staff up to that same level and expect you to be able to cover it necessarily. So those are the concerns about the operational piece. And if we come off of that, the point that the staff has made, and rightfully so, the TIF fund piece where the administration piece comes off, that's $800,000. But if you budgeted a $750,000 surplus and you're taking in $850,000 or $900,000 out of TIF, that's basically a wash. So when you get to 25%, you don't need the $800,000, you're back to zero, and you can go forward without the TIF revenue piece that's coming into the general fund if you can maintain the discipline necessary to operate within the current constraints of the economy. And if we do get the growth, and if we do get a turnaround, and we get a nice surprise, wouldn't it be nice then to come back and add a position or two at the point where you actually had the revenue to do it? At this point, your revenue growth isn't there to sustain that, and I'm just concerned that we're going to take the spending side forward, and not that there aren't real needs, I understand that, but in a business, you work within the constraint and you make it happen. And that's part of the necessity of trying to reallocate resources into the staffing positions that you want to function and hit those highest priorities. That's the way I feel about it. And I was hoping to convince some of my cohorts on the Finance Advisory Committee, but I'm unable to do that, except for this guy. And I'm not trying to convince him necessarily.
Alderman Baker.
I've been doing this a lot of years, and this year is very transparent, much more in-depth than many years. Especially every other year, whether it's an election year, we have to depend on advice from the longer-term finance advisory people, the professionals. That's what their committee is for. I have two things I'd like to recommend. One, Mayor, please visit with them. The two members that never make it, ask for their resignation, please, so that they can have a quorum on their own and come back with some advice to us before we go through the next public hearings. And that will help all of us on the council to maybe see the light, or at least be able to examine things that we might personally be concerned about. The other one is Mark Espy. I know your hands are tied, and I've watched this over the last 10 years, spending less and less, and Ron Naylor was screaming, and I thought, well, somebody must be listening to him. I mean, he was right in my right ear, and I heard it, but the money was not being spent. And John, I don't know if you guys can come up with a priority, but I don't expect that you're going to be able to bid out replacement of streets and lots of new blacktop. The tollway's got everybody tied up locally, I've heard from the coffee shops. And I think maybe this is the time, and I haven't spoken with you ahead of time, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but if you need a new hot mix setup to do some patching, and I think it was definitely last year, the company that came down, Annie Glidden, they were crack filling like there was no tomorrow. They just zipped right through, and I asked them their price, and it was half what I could get it done, and they were really efficient. But then again, maybe you could be done in-house. It's not much equipment, just tank that they heat up the stuff, and they got a wand, and you just need one guy with talent and others with the ability to get the cracks ready. I mean, I've watched it done. I know that we can do that in-house if you want to. I don't even know, but I'm not asking for a comment.
Well, there's one thing that,
Okay.
you know, I've tried to stress before. There's not a ward in this town right now that doesn't have potholes. And I guarantee, next January, February, you're gonna be calling me. And I'm telling you right now, if that machine doesn't run, my hands are tied. Now, we've got the Durapatcher that we can use in the summertime, but when winter operation comes around and that machine won't run any longer, I have no idea what I'll do.
All the calls I'm getting now are, well, up until yesterday, all the calls I got were to do with the streets.
Yep.
And the text messages and calls I'm getting after that have to do with how we're spending our money. But I want to take a step back and say, I'm concerned about the condition of our streets. And for those on the council that maybe have never had to pay for a new blacktop driveway, if you maintain it, you can lengthen that out, and we've been told that, but it's reality. If you can fill those cracks so they don't, you know, with the hot mix or the tar, the crack fill, I guess they call it, and do your patching, you're going to get a number of extra years out of it. And if it reaches that point of no return, you may as well not do anything because you're going to replace that street. But you know, that's the other thing I'd like to hear back from the staff. And I didn't ask. I went down and paid my tax bill today, and there's a portion on there for DeKalb streets and roads. I don't know, which bill ever I paid, it was like $500. And I'd love to see how all that money that's collected actually, does it go into a pool by itself? Does it get spent? What are we spending? Because I, for one, was shocked to find out we need $13 million that nobody's planned for. And I'm not blaming anybody. It's here. I appreciate the staff pointing it out to us. And I know we've waited a couple of years for that company to come in and do what they did. I think it was last year. They took the core samples and went around with their machine and basically gave us a checkup, and we're in sad shape.
Alderman Markwart.
Okay. To come back to the one-offs in the general fund and that part, just to get it in my head a little bit better. Were those accounting changes done so that as we go forward, we're having a truer picture of our operating expenses?
I think there's a different explanation for several of them. So the water transfer, and I can address that. I've had a lot of questions on that. That was an accounting, something that was done years ago that really through the implementation of GASB 34, they wanted to start directly hitting charges to the enterprise funds, be it water, parking lots, or whatever those funds are, instead of trying to do that mass transfer, which is very non-transparent. So, so that is an accounting change, and that's permanent. That's not a one-off.
Okay.
Same with the sanitary sewer district billing. That is an accounting change. It's also not a one-off. It's also only about 6 months' worth of revenue that we're accounting for this year. So that we're still negotiating with them, so I wouldn't want to say, but that revenue stream will stay and potentially grow. Again, the airport, we are absolutely trying to make that sustainable. We're going to do a whole revamp of revenues to see if we can do that. So that may or may not be a one-off. And as far as the workers' comp transfer, we have 3 internal service funds that have a very nice reserve fund balance right now. So I don't want to, I didn't want to do all changes all in one year, but I know that there's still some more changes that can be made to help streamline and simplify our budgeting process. So.
Okay. So then, just to follow up, you had mentioned there was a $500,000, in your opening remarks, $500,000 cut in expenses.
Right. The fiscal 16 budget expenditures were lower than the fiscal 15 budgeted dollars by $582,863.
And that dollar amount comes from partly that, or does it come from the various departments cutting costs
I think it's a
ahead of time?
combination.
So it's a combination of, some comes from that part, and the other part comes from,
Right. The general fund is not transferring as much out. We're not supporting the public safety capital fund any longer. That fund's gone, so that's not a one-off. That's completely gone. That was $400,000 last year, I think $500,000 the year before.
Okay. And then on our list here, as far as, these are all, the staffing and the new requests, those are all included in the budget already
Correct.
as it was presented currently.
Correct.
So we're somewhat sort of balanced that I'm going for. Okay.
And just as
Knowing that everything is fluctuating and could fluctuate because nothing's totally set in stone.
just for reference, the total of the staffing recommendations and the new requests that, we would put on hold, waiting for the state's decision is $640,076. So that's a significant chunk that's visible, transparent, that can just wait until that budget has been finalized. Or not done.
Mike?
A couple of points. I believe that there are some hard continuing costs and benefits that are included in this list, and I'm not sure that the most important thing is that there are accounting and there are changes on the expenditure side too. So I'm willing to say, okay, we're, as Alderman Marquardt said, we're kind of balanced. It appears. With respect to, I almost called you Alderman, Mr. Tarazinski's suggestions, it's a philosophical issue as to whether you want a budget for that $750,000 surplus. I understand the point, and it's one that needs to be considered, and there is a position that can be definitely used to justify that. The workman's comp issue concerns me a little bit. And if Rudy Espiritu was here, he would be rolling his eyes, but I will keep saying it over and over and over again. I believe that the city is not appropriately insured for workman's comp claims. I think there was a mistake made a couple of years ago to not join a risk pool. I realize that there would have been some upfront cost, but the insurance that the city has bought is very, very narrow. It only covers a very narrow band, and if you have a very large claim against the city, we're essentially self-insured. So the fact that we have had good claims experience over the last year or two doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have that same kind of claims experience in the future. So I haven't done the analysis, so I cannot question any analysis that was done by staff, but I would want to assure that I built a cushion for large claims in the future, because things have a way of coming around. You have a good year, and all it takes is one really bad year to bankrupt you. I don't mean that in the legal sense, but to use up your entire fund balance. The second thing that I want to reiterate is something that City Manager Gora said, and that I think it's important for consideration. It may not affect the bottom line for people, but the positions of the HR director and the IT director are not new positions. Okay? You're hiring new people into those positions, and you are making some expenditures in the budget that may not have been there at some period in the recent past. But those are not new positions, those are actually open positions that are going to be refilled, and the city manager's memo on that explains the prioritization of that. Personally, I think that the memo, first time I saw it was tonight, does explain how an HR professional can help pay for themselves. This is to some extent the old Mr. Goodwrench commercial, pay me now or pay me later. Well, you know, what is the cost of not having an HR professional in the room? And finally, and this is something that is not popular to say, and I don't know. I mean, I know what some of the analysis has shown, but it's possible that it's not the expenditures that are out of whack. It's possible that the revenue side of the budget is what is lagging. And in my opinion, your first responsibility as the legislative body of a city is to provide the necessary services at a quality that is efficient and effective from a cost standpoint. But in the long term, we have, as a city, made a lot of decisions that are coming back, and the dollars are coming to roost now. Some of those are operational. They aren't just capital, but we have a big looming 800-pound gorilla, elephant, whatever, in the room with respect to streets, with respect to the fleet, and with respect to the water system. And those are things that are not in the current budget document, but they're things that can't be ignored and will have to be funded at some level.
I would just like to observe that, Mike, your comments that the two positions, HR and IT, are not new positions, but are filling positions that previously existed. But they're being filled with new skill sets.
Correct.
And I think City Manager Gora has attempted to lay out where those skill sets are lacking today and where they'll be complemented. The other thing I wanted to point out that I'm aware operationally that we're not giving adequate response to retirees. I know specifically I've gotten complaints that HR is not responsive to retirees. And when I've investigated it, there's good reason for that, where there's the 1.5 HR persons are preoccupied. But I suspect there are employee responses that are lagging as well. I think additional staffing in that HR position could increase. We discussed the concern from Council of Employee Morale. I think an additional staffing in HR of an appropriate skill set could begin complementing and gain on that morale front. On the IT front, having a skill set that has the bigger picture view could improve the software response and the technology response that we're lagging at the present time. So those positions, Mike, I would just offer, would be refilled, but they'd be refilled with new skill sets. And I think that's what we've attempted to have the city manager clarify. Tom?
Just to continue the debate on that, I guess I don't understand what we mean when we say new positions. If they're not in the 15 budget, and they haven't been approved as to positions, then they're new to they are over and above what was budgeted in 15. They're being requested as additions in all the memos in 16's budget. The comment I made earlier about if there's 220 full-time positions that are approved and in your 15 budget, when I say freeze at, suggest a freeze at that level, those positions would not be approved in that budget, but doesn't mean you couldn't fill them if in fact you found a way to backfill those positions with other less positions that have less of a need than those highest priority. I think the concept of setting priorities to meet your objectives is absolutely necessary, and if those are the highest priorities amongst the staff, so be it. But those would be, they are additional positions. They aren't filled today, and I don't want to play a word game with that, but I'm almost thinking that's what just occurred.
Alderman Stone.
Yeah, I think what's really happening is yes, those titles basically existed. We're filling those titles with new people, but what we're doing is taking those existing people and moving them into new positions, essentially.
They're
So
additions.
we are adding a couple new positions. You know, the top title was probably already there.
Right.
It's just that now we're adding a position at the second tier level, and that's where we're putting the existing personnel is into that second tier level, is one way to look at it.
But I think there's quite a difference here, and I understand the subtleties, and I think I can defend either position. But the bottom line is that you have a staffing plan for an organization. An HR director and the people below the HR director, these intermediate positions, have been part of the past staffing plan for the city. Now, whether you have filled those positions in the last couple of years or not is not irrelevant, but it's not the key factor. For example, when we hired a finance director was part of the core staffing of this city, and it was ignored for a lot of years. Okay? An HR director is a core staffing position for an organization the size of the city of DeKalb. Okay? Now, will your personnel costs be higher than they were in 2015, fiscal year 2015? Yes. And the question is, are you bringing your staffing up to what your staffing plan was, or are you adding on to what your basic staffing plan was for the municipality? Well, I would argue that you're bringing yourself up to the level that you should have been. But, you know, reasonable people can disagree, and this is a subtle point, and we will not resolve it by having an argument about it. It's two different perspectives, and I think both perspectives need to be put out there and see the light of day.
Thank you. Was there another comment? Alderperson O'Leary.
I said I'm done.
Mr. Peddle made a statement saying that we don't have, what kind of insurance? I thought we got catastrophic insurance, so we don't have it?
No, you don't. That is my opinion. What you have is you have insurance that will cover you in a narrow band. You pay everything, if I'm remembering right, you pay everything up to $600,000. The insurance pays from, I think, $600,000 to $1 million. My numbers might be off. But if it's over $1 million, the city pays it. You have insured only a narrow band by buying the insurance that you did. You are not part of a risk pool. You have coverage for what are normally considered to be, based on the city's experience, catastrophic claims between, I think it's 600 and $1 million, But if you had a claim that was above that, you're not insured for that.
We,
I don't know.
and Patty might step in, we are semi-self-insured,
Correct.
so we do have insurance, we do have catastrophic insurance, and I think you're correct, if it's catastrophic, we're
It's over six.
eligible up to the 600,000, I think,
It's
per.
over six.
It's over six,
650.
but
Over
there's a
six,
cap
but
on
I
it.
don't know
Yeah.
what the cap is.
I will say we have at least 3, if not 4 years of experience now, so the intention is to do an RFP to look at going to a pool, because I do agree that is less of a risk to be in a pool,
That's- yeah.
which is a great thing. So that is something on the horizon that we are looking at, but we are insured.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Monica, did you have more?
Yeah, because I was under the impression we went from being self-insured to the catastrophic, and so it's like every year I'm thinking we're doing one thing, and then it's turned out that we didn't do it. For instance, with the computer program, I'm thinking that we got an updated system, and now we've been told that it's old, and I'm like, we just got it, 2013. And so we spent all this money in this program. So I haven't heard, are we gonna go back to them and find out how we can recoup what we invested? Because we invested, I thought, about 210,000, something like that for that. And we're being told 2 years later that it's no good. And that's frustrating me, because we're spending money doing the same things over and over again, and I'm just like, why? So either they need to bring the system up to where they told us it would be, which I think they need to do. I don't think we need to spend any more money. I think they need to bring it up to what that we were told we were gonna get. And someone said they needed to add a part, whatever they need to add, that's what they need to do. Because we shouldn't have to keep buying the system. It's only been 2 years. Another system. And when it comes down to the 2 positions, IT or HR, I'm not for that at all. I'm not. I know we need, I was more concerned when I heard Mark speak and said that when he's out there working, they need a third person to back something, and they don't have it. I'm like, okay, we need to get another person that can do that. The public work needs vehicles. Okay, we need to look on that. Software, I don't think we need to we need to fix the system we have now, learn how to use it, whatever it is, I think we need to fix that. Streets, I think the streets, the money that we have in TIF, that we can fix the streets in TIF, I think we need to put money aside for the TIF, out of TIF for the streets, because that's something we need to do. What else I had here? Well, that's it for right now.
I can address 2 of those issues, and Tom, maybe you can help me, but with the workers' comp, we were not insured several years back, is my understanding, and we
That's
did
correct.
become self-insured. So we did go to a self-insured insurance, 3 years ago?
We went to a catastrophic
We went to
insurance for
catastrophic.
workers' comp,
So,
yes.
but we did not go to a pool. So we did change
Right.
our insurance.
Yeah. And we,
It would've
and to make
cost
sure
you-
it was covered, we set that $1 million.
Discussed that there was a cap.
I don't recall what the
I don't
cap
know,
is.
I don't recall being a cap.
I don't
There-
recall.
Again, if that's the case, then
We
we
need to find that
throwing
out.
away
I don't know.
$400,000 a
Dollars.
year.
Right,
year.
that's been my point all the way along, Dave.
If it's a $600,000 charger and $1 million cap, that $400,000 we've been paying would have paid that cap.
Right,
Right. It's,
So
it,
what was the purpose of going after that insurance?
right.
We didn't
my,
have-
my understanding.
Not totally.
Right. My understanding is that the situation that you're in right now is you're self-insured, so consider it an insurance deductible. It's like a deductible, up to $600,000 per occurrence, not $600,000 total. $600,000 per occurrence. And then you bought insurance that would cover you up to an amount. It's knowable what that cap is, but there is a cap. And the city council made the decision that since I don't think you had a claim that exceeded that particular cap in the near past, that was fine, that they would just buy the insurance up to that cap. But there is a cap, and if you had a very large claim, above that, the city would be on the hook for that. Whereas with a risk pool, you're getting much broader coverage, but as you remember, there was a buy-in. Just like with our health insurance, we got a rebate, I think, from the health insurance. Is that right? That because the healthcare costs dropped, what we had to pay in was less with our risk pool.
Oh, I'm not sure, because I wasn't here.
So, anyway, the buy-in for the risk pool on workers' comp and property casualty was significant. It may have been as much as $2 million. Yeah, something like that. But what you were buying with that, that's the buy-in. What you were buying with that is a lot more insurance, and then the possibility of getting rebates in the future.
Well, let me jump in. It was a 900,000 or $1 million, but we had to pay it in advance.
Correct.
So we really had to come up with almost $2 million for the first 12 months. But if we ever dropped
Right.
back out of it, we were paid a year ahead.
Right.
But I didn't realize we were capped.
Yes.
I thought we found an alternative to that protected. I thought it was 20 million, but
And just to clarify, per occurrence does not mean per employee. If we had a fire in a house and 5 firefighters were injured, obviously that's nothing we ever want to happen, but that would be one occurrence. And it would cover all individuals injured in that occurrence. So I just wanted to clarify, occurrence does not mean employee.
The other thing, if I could add, what has been communicated to me in the past through former Assistant City Manager Rudy Espiritu, is that when the city went out previously to look at the pool, that one of the issues or the concerns was there wasn't enough experience, so that the amount that was quoted might have been higher. And that's why, at least I understood, is that to take a step back and then have the city be able to have that experience moving forward. So as staff, as we've discussed this internally, we would recommend putting together an RFP that we would ultimately take to the Finance Advisory Committee for review, and then a recommendation going to council to look at doing an RFP for going out to a pool. And I can tell you that several of us that are involved in these types of issues have served other communities that have utilized risk management pools in a very successful manner.
Alderman Baker.
two things. One, as far as spending whatever TIF money is available on streets, I'm all for that. I don't have a problem with that. Monica, I do echo your concern. But I understand with the software, though, we pretty much bought something that was obsolete, it sounds like, and it wouldn't have been obsolete had that company not been purchased and they decided not to come up with the add-on module that would have given us what we thought we were buying into. So we don't have any choice but to go back to Muneris, is it? Or-
Munis.
Munis, okay. Unless you find a different company that can do it. But we just got to bite the bullet and go get some software that works. But I'm all for anything to do with good software, IT. When we had extra people when I say extra, we have fewer people now to say take care of the street light timing. I'm getting complaints on that again all over the place. And I know it's a lot of work to fix it. I don't know what you got to do, but maybe that new software program would help. But that's enough.
I'd like to speak to not using TIF dollars for the streets. What that supports is using TIF dollars for operational expense, in my mind. Those street improvements would come out of general fund otherwise. And I think using TIF dollars, it diverts TIF dollars from transformational projects to maintenance type projects. And I think as city manager has pointed out, those TIF funds are going to be expiring. We've got to wean ourselves off of that revenue stream, and I'd suggest the sooner we do that, the better, and use those remaining TIF dollars for transformational type projects. Alderman Baker.
I'll, to clarify where I'm coming from, we spent so much money in the downtown off of TIF to transform it. Every time there was a street resurfacing project that crossed the TIF, we took it from the TIF so we could get more bang for our buck. In other words, it just didn't come up to the TIF and stop, we extended it. We have an opportunity right now to invest in the TIF that will last hopefully 20 years if we rebuild or resurface these streets with TIF dollars within that TIF over the next few years. To me, that is an investment in those areas because they'll show to be newer. I mean, nobody wants to invest in, say, a commercial area if the streets are full of potholes. I mean, we're really at the cutting edge of, we could go the wrong way. We're already starting down that slope, it looks to me. And it isn't something that happened overnight. I guess maybe I was more lulled to sleep because the state comes through and fixes 23 and 38, and those are the most commonly traveled roads by myself. But I am getting calls from the neighborhoods, and I am dodging potholes all over the place to try to not have to replace tires and wheels myself.
Alderperson O'Leary.
I would like to say that, to our city manager, I know you all inherit all this. You know, everything that you all have uncovered and showed us of what's been going on. I understand that you all inherit all the problems that the city has undergone over the years. But at the same time, right now in the community, my phone hasn't stopped ringing about increases in us. And I'm like, all I can say is that we have not raised anything at this time. We're in budget discussing. So that's, you know, what I'm saying. But at the same time, I need to see how, with our budget, what are we actually cutting? Are we making any cuts? Or I haven't seen anything cut up. We need so much from streets to water. We need some of everything. And I'm like, wow, we have wasted money, millions of dollars downtown, to beautify downtown, just on the outside, but the insides are falling apart. So we got another problem. So I'm like, we have so much that's going on. But I need to see a budget where we can, what are we cutting? What are we cutting back on? What, you know, I understand all the people that brought in, they're professionals and all that, but can these professionals multitask? Can they do more than one thing? Because we can't afford to continue to dump all the problems on the people when our city now is over 51% low income. And people are moving out. And we're not growing like we should. I need to see where we can cut something. I know we need so much, but how can we utilize what we have a little better? How can we pull it in closer? Like, if whatever I have to do, I got to do. We have to do it at home. Okay, we don't have this, let's make do. How can we make do? What else can we do to make do here? Outside of raising, increasing, or spending. For instance, every time we have to do a project or an analyst, it's $50,000. I am so against us spending $50,000 to analyze the Egyptian theater, a place that we do not own as the city. And I understand the people downtown, they say they support the Egyptian theater. Well, I need them supported with some finances, not just words, because when we stop supporting the Egyptian theater, guess what? It's going to close down. It's going because right now, to my understanding, they already lost $70,000 last year. And we keep dumping money after money there. I don't think it's the city's responsibility to put an air conditioning system in that place. It is not ours. And those are just my feelings of this. It's not ours.
Sure. City manager.
Sure, thank you. Just to address a couple of the comments, as I sit here, I can't point to the specific places that have been cut, but I can tell you that we spent 2 weeks going through the budgets. I recall specifically the airport budget, we spent 2.5 hours going line item by line item and seeing what was either being recommended or what could be reduced. So there were, yes, you're seeing additions, but we did not call out the reductions. What we're trying to do as staff is look at how do we provide the service to the community. When you look at addressing probably the calls that you're receiving from the residents, I want to be clear, and I pointed this out at the other meeting, in regards to the capital, when you look at the water fund, when you look at streets, when you look at fleet and equipment, options were provided. Ultimately, the policy decision, you have the best case scenario to status quo, and it's going to be council's direction as to where to fall in between. Staff is not, to be clear, staff is not recommending as an example for the street spending $9 million a year. We can't afford to spend $9 million a year. But because of the study that the city council had previously authorized and directed our city engineer to do, it was asked to see what would be the cost, what is our current pavement index, which across the community is 78, and what would be the cost to maintain that. The cost to maintain that is $9 million. As staff, we are not recommending spending $9 million a year because we can't afford $9 million a year. But you have to look at, do you want to maintain the status quo? And I think in our previous conversation, previous meeting is, if you maintain the status quo, the streets will continue to deteriorate and it will have a greater impact on the street division and they'll have greater difficulty keeping up. So then we'll have to probably shift some of the funds more on the support side of the equation to be able to deal with that. In regards to fleet and equipment, once again, you have the gamut. There's a $10 million value of the fleet, and the choice is how are we going to address some of these things? And some of them are not, it's not a wish list or a nice to have. We have ambulances that absolutely need to be replaced in the next couple of years, and part of the challenge is how do we fund those? Our existing revenue stream is not sufficient to deal with the capital items, specifically streets, fleet, and equipment. So that's why the finance director presented alternate revenue options. We didn't say, go with this one, go with that one. Our goal was to present several different options on the table. If the council's direction is not to consider those options, then every fiscal year, we're going to be coming to you saying, how do we buy that next ambulance? How do we buy more vehicles? The moment of truth is upon us of how we're dealing with this, and part of this, as we talked in previous meetings, goes back to what's been communicated to me was approximately 16 years or so. That's when the city started not having a reserve or funding vehicles, and then 10 years ago or so, the city went into a lease purchase for new and used vehicles and equipment. And now there was no plan at that time, as I understand, of what happens when that 10 years is up. So the 10 years is up, and there's some specialized equipment in the fire department, as an example, that we need to address. So I understand, I'm sure you're getting questions and comments. There's policy decisions, and as Director Haley and I met earlier today, what we want to make sure and clarify, and she mentioned this at the beginning of her presentation, our recommendation on the capital side is not make a decision tonight. We did not make any assumptions tied into any new revenues in relation to the budget. Our recommendation in relation to the water fund would be to defer that item to July. We would bring back the consultant from, or the engineers from Burns and McDonald's. They have now presented a 1A scenario. So you have 4 scenarios on the table, and it goes from best case scenario to status quo. But our recommendation was let's bring the engineers back so you have more of an opportunity to ask detailed questions. The policy decision or the question we would want is, do you want that at a committee of the whole, or do you want that as a joint finance advisory and city council meeting? And whatever you decide, we'll coordinate. So our suggestion or recommendation is deal with water in July, and then in August, then tackle the whole issue of where you want to go with streets and fleet, from anywhere from best case scenario, which we're not recommending in relation to streets, to somewhere in between to status quo, and just know what those ramifications are. And once again, give direction to us as, do you want that at a council, at a committee of the whole meeting? Do you want us to schedule a special joint meeting with the Finance Advisory Committee? So really what's before you today is what's on the table, which is a balanced budget, which And whatever direction you give on saying, yes, we want this in the budget, or no, we don't want that in the budget, we will proceed forward with.
But can we, since our streets are in critical condition, can we do something? Do we have anything budgeted for our streets for this year?
Yes, and I'm going to ask Director Haley to highlight and point out, and then I'll also ask if City Engineer Laskowski needs to clarify it all. So, Director Haley?
So you just correct me if I'm wrong, but I know in the capital fund, we have money for street resurfacing and maintenance. I think it's $300,000.
That's correct.
And then there's some money in the MFT fund,
That's correct also.
I believe $350,000.
Which will make zero effect based on the study. Throwing money in a wall.
And TIF, there is the Oak Street, the
The
$250,000.
$250,000 for Oak Street between 2nd and 4th Street.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's it?
Alderman Jacobs.
I don't think it's any surprise, and I share a lot of Monica's concerns. Again, there's different semantics that I hear every year, and again, I realize you guys inherited a lot of problems coming in after the last regime that I was saying was doing it poorly, and a lot of my council members defended how professional and how wonderful they were doing their jobs. The reality is, when we say we've made a lot of cuts, yet our overall budget, our surpluses shrank, we've already absorbed all those cuts. So there really aren't major cuts that we've, but as soon as we cut $10, we're spending 20. So the reality is the cuts are part of the issue we're facing here. Is we haven't funded streets, we haven't funded vehicles, we haven't funded infrastructure because we're funding salaries. And we use the excuse, well, we're a customer service-based business, we have to pay top staff, top salaries, 220 employees, we need all those things. If you have 200 cooks in a kitchen making $100,000 a year and can't afford cheese or bread to make the pizza, you can't go out and ask the people to spend $1,500 on that pizza and say, well, either, we got to pay the cooks. It doesn't work that way. That's not how business works. And the reality is that as we continue to go along down the road, the main root of this problem, the disease, the issue that we keep trying to treat all the symptoms of, is revenue is not increasing. In many cases, it's probably going the other way. Yet salaries keep increasing. Yet we keep hiring more people. And instead of being able to fund the things we need for those people to do their jobs, they're taking it home with them and putting it into retirement houses and putting it into nice cars and putting it into their wherever else they want to spend it on their families. And that's great. The problem is the rest of the community is suffering. The people that we represent, not the 220 that work within these walls, are the people now being asked to dig deeper. Those are the people that can't afford it. Those are the people that have to make the decision, does it make sense to live here anymore? Do we want to be part of this community where our neighbors are very well taken care of because they work for the city, and I have to go to work 60 or 80 hours a week to make sure that they have those nice things? And that's the issue we should be tackling. We haven't talked about how we're going to reduce calls in the police department that I've asked for 2 years. We've seen, and Gene's demonstrated to us, that our calls per capita are outrageous compared to our community size and community demographics. We haven't addressed how do we get those down. We haven't tackled how we're going to start reducing overtime hours. Yet we keep bringing in more people to specialize. Again, in the restaurant model, if I'm the owner in the restaurant, of course I want to hire someone to do every single job for me. I want a dishwasher. I want a cook. I want a waitress. I want someone to greet the people at the door. I want a valet. I want all those things. But if the people that are coming into my restaurant can't afford to pay for those things, I'm out of business. The reality is the city is going out of business. We haven't been investing. The money is being sucked out of the water fund. The money's being sucked out of MFT. The money's being sucked out of TIF. The money's being sucked out of all these things that should be paying for those. The people are already contributing. And it's going east in cars, back to the suburbs to be spent not in our community. And that's where the people are upset. When we start talking, getting all these phone calls, they don't want to see their water rates go up. They don't want to see their taxes to go up. They're having trouble affording that now and justifying staying in this community. And those are the things we need to start tackling and discussing and fixing. Just raising one end and letting everybody leave off the back end isn't gonna fix our problem. Again, I think yet again, this budget deals with a lot of symptoms, and while I appreciate it's again, a neutral, cost-neutral budget, and it's at least break even, at some point, all these little loopholes and accounting tricks and pots of money that we've put away and little bits here and there, they're gonna run out, and we're getting to that point real quickly here. I don't know at what point this community can afford to live here. And to continue this game where they get very little and they're told that everything is all right and the government is taking care of you. At some point, again, even as Monica's mentioned, there have been times up here, and I'm not blaming any staff in the room, that we have been outright lied to. We have been told things, very expensive purchases, that we have had hours of discussion on. Where this reason, and we need this, and they're justified, the insurance, the software. There's been many decisions we've made up here. And the reality is we're not getting all of the story, apparently. And we just keep finding out about it after the fact. I appreciate this budget is much more transparent than I've seen it in the past.
It is.
But again, this is kicking it down the road again. The reality is we can't raise taxes. The reality is our incomes are stagnant. So then, what are those realities in terms of staffing? Not more staff, not more raises. That's what got us here. At some point, we have to bite the bullet and start talking words that people don't like to hear for morale's sake. And I've had this discussion with many of us in closed session, whether those words are outsourcing or layoffs or salary cuts. That's what this community may need at some point. Unfortunately, the 220 people that work here can't all make $200,000 or $300,000 a year, while the rest of the community lives in squalor. And until they understand that, until we start focusing on that issue, we're treating symptoms and not at all affecting the disease.
Mayor, can I respond?
Well, I'd like to clarify, David, in your comments, you pointed to past information that council has spent hours hearing justification for and acting on. You then shifted into the present and said, we aren't getting accurate information. I would challenge that.
In my time here, I
Okay.
feel that oftentimes the information is, and again, I said I'm not blaming anybody in the
So
room now.
that's not in the current context, and I want to make sure that
Through the
was
history,
clarified.
through the history I've sat in this chair.
City manager?
Thank you, Mayor. And yes, if at any point in time we're not providing enough information, please let us know, because actually I've heard from several, I've had compliments as to the amount of detail that's been provided in the budget this year. But I just want to make a couple comments that when you look at this budget, you can't cut your way out of the infrastructure issues. To give you a point of comparison, I was mentioning a few minutes ago addressing Alderman O'Leary's comment in relation to streets. So in order to maintain the streets at a level of a 78, which is a $9 million amount, which we're not recommending, if you were to pay for that, that would be eliminating the entire fire department. The fire department budget is $9 million. The police department budget's about $12 million, so to speak in magnitude. So you're not, the city can't cut its way out of this, and my perspective that I feel the answer, part of the answer, it's not the whole answer, but part of the answer is growing the tax base and attracting new businesses like Project Black Bear, because not only does it address many of the issues as far as unemployment, income stagnation, helping the community, helping the tax base, it's helping the school district. So that is a big part of the equation, and that's what we're trying to do. You know, we haven't really emphasized this or pointed this out, but for the council and the committee and the public, you know, we talk about, well, what did we cut? I think the other thing to throw on the table is where did we save money, and what is the value of professional staff? Our assistant city manager worked with our health insurance provider to reduce our health insurance costs by over $200,000 in the coming year. That is something that was on the table that could have been done previously, but wasn't done. So That is the value of professional staff, when you have the right person in the right position, knowing where to look and knowing how to negotiate and work with different entities. So I just want to point it out, it's not always just cutting, it's where can you save, and that is definitely a savings. You know, in the specific questions on the police department, it's one of the issues that you deal with. How do you reduce the overtime? Part of the issue sometimes is you reduce by adding more. And the best example is what Chief Hicks communicated to me in the past as far as what was happened with the fire department in a previous year. The issue I know we've seen in particular in the last year in the police department, and Chief Lauer can always add to this, is when all of a sudden you have a number of employees who are out at one time. So if you're going to try to maintain your minimum staffing level, then you incur those overtime hours. As far as how do we reduce the calls, I think we're doing that. I mean, the chief can speak to, over the past 3 years since he's been here, you've seen a steady decrease in all the numbers, and that ties specifically to the philosophical shift in the police department from being reactive to being proactive. So police department's having an incredibly positive impact on the community, and the credit goes to the chief and all the staff at the police department for their diligent effort. And I bring that
And
up.
our numbers are down in police, but our calls are still up, are they not, Gene?
Yeah, our calls for service are higher. We had a little over 44,000 events that we dealt with last year, calls for service, choose the term you like.
It's
And-
one per person in this town.
And
doesn't
over
look scary.
19,000 911s, it is. But every time you take and create a better way to report crime, iWatch, bring in a new software system that identifies and captures the data better, you're going to have some increases. But I think the positive correlation is your community's willing to talk to the police, and that doesn't happen in every community. But they are events we have to deal with. So I agree with you. I don't like seeing them that high. I don't like us having a bigger load than some of the bigger cities we have, but we're trying to address it. But one thing I would say, and I mean, this conversation's all over the board, but for example, and let me just focus on police overtime, because that's killing us. But I look at, first I'll go back to the historical aspect of police overtime. In 2009, when I wasn't here, and whoever was building the budget back in those days planned for fiscal year 10, they budgeted 400, I'm only straining because as I age, the vision starts to go, about $499,000 for overtime for FY10, 2010. So almost $500,000 for overtime in the police budget. So we go to FY15, which was planned before the new staff came here, and we budgeted $374,000, and $125,000 less than we budgeted planning in 2009 for fiscal year 10, when over every one of those years, the bargaining units got a raise, and in a couple of those years, management got zero. So I sit back and go, gosh, I mean, it's certainly an issue in the big picture, and I guess I'm just trying to point out the benefit of qualified staff. But if we're budgeting $125,000 less than we did 5 years ago, what's the thought process behind it? I think if you're
We've
looking,
brought on 8 new full-time staff in the police department every now.
we
That was the difference.
well,
So the 800 has saved us 125.
certainly, but I think there's another answer to the question as well. I think the transparency issue is far more present today than it has been in years. So then let's look at the HR component of overtime. I've come to the council on more than one occasion and said we're getting crushed in communications. So we have 11 full-time telecommunicators. So far in fiscal year 15, we've been down 4 full-time positions. That's 36% of our staff. Much of the reasoning for those positions not being filled wasn't because anybody is a bad person. It was because we didn't have things in place so we're getting the HR needs addressed in the city. So how do we compensate for that? It's overtime. You know, on the police end, we had 5 vacant police positions this year. That's 12% of our patrol division. How do we compensate for that? We compensate for it in overtime. And when Monica or anyone asks, how do we address it? Even with that, and even with the overtime where it's at, and as of the end of our 11th period of spending coming up, the police department's right at our budget. I mean, right at it. We're hanging on by our teeth, trying not to go over it. In the same period in 2014, from January to May, compared to the same period in 2015, we've had a 60% decrease in overtime spending because we did an internal study and started to staff based on demand in a non-traditional sense. Not saying every shift had to have X amount of people, we'll staff based on demand. And we did hour by hour, day by day, 365 days a year. So we've cut our overtime by 60%. Yet, when I look at what's the cost of not having somebody qualified run HR? Because we still see this time and time again, how to get people up to speed. We're still waiting to get our final vacant slot filled. So, and I guess in handling other aspects of this too, we have 8 maternity-related leaves in fiscal year 15 so far. I think sometimes when we look at pictures, we look at Committeeman Tarazinski's position, which is, we've got to cut. We look at the city staff's position, which is saying, if you don't get the right people in the right spot, you can cut all you want. But I look back at 2008, and I'm only using anecdotal information historically, this city cut staff to the bone. I don't know how much more Public Works can take a whack. I don't know how much more fire could take a whack, although they've gotten a few folks. Police have gotten a few folks, and we've seen some positives from that. So I guess to try and bring my scattered response to some clarity, I think it's important to have the right finance people in the right place, the right HR people in the right place, and the right technology people in the right place. And does it cost? It does cost. But what's the cost if you don't? And the big HR one that I keep telling staff when we work on this stuff is, I came from an agency that was under a consent decree for 10 years under the Department of Justice. It cost us millions of dollars. Not, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 for a website. It cost us millions of dollars. And it was because there were bad practices. We're fortunate that we've identified a bad practice and got it remedied for a relatively low amount of money, and now know that we have the opportunity to make it right. So I agree with Chairman Peddle, it's pay now or pay later. It scares me, the big time pay later. I think we're all trying to do the best we can to cut. And I guess on the selfish, and I apologize to the sarcastic side, I don't know anybody in city government's making, in this city, that's making $200,000 to $300,000 a year. If you know that person, sign me up. I think we're all trying to do the best we can. We all know there's a major, major gorilla sitting on the state revenues that could hurt us. We're all trying to make preparations to when that big one comes. But if we don't put some of these things in place that will start to repair some of these functions that don't work right, I think we're going to pay bigger prices in the end. And I'm sorry I took up so much time.
Mayor, can I make a comment, please? My area obviously is charged with economic development, and economic development is based on branding and imaging and promoting the strengths that a community has. Every community has weaknesses, and what's important is how are we working together to solve them. And I find a significant group of people in this community that are working together right now to build on our positives and coordinate and break down silos and connect and pollinate good things. This ABC grant, that's one of the reasons we've advanced to the next step. And our words here at meetings like this are very important because they get picked up by the press. And sometimes I sit here and I think, how am I going to recruit businesses when the message being broadcast to the world is that everybody's leaving? Everybody's not leaving, but we are at a tipping point. And I think we have to acknowledge that tipping point, and we are doing that. But we need to focus on the solutions and not the problems, or we're just going to dig the holes deeper. We are a service organization. I looked back at old budgets from 07, 08 and the community development budget here is a little bit less than it was in '07, but you have to realize how thin we are. We're staffed here at a third of the size of the department that I ran in Mount Prospect. Yeah, it was a suburban community, but a third of the size. I spent Friday morning working the building counter. We have one person. We don't have the option of overtime because we have one person per slot. So that's how thinly staffed we are. I'm not asking for more staff right now. I'm just saying that we are at that tipping point, and we have to watch our words as we present ourselves to the world because it will impact our economic development activities.
Thank you, Director DeVita. Alderman Baker.
I echo your concern, and no, I don't think everybody's leaving, Dave. I think a couple of years ago there was a lot of perception and reality, but there's some things that I've noticed in the past few months, talking to landlords and apartment managers. The problems are gone. I mean, thanks to our police chief and many of the positive things in our community. And I want to thank the city manager and the staff that she's brought in. Monica and I leaned over and I said, Monica, under the previous administration, we wouldn't even have known about these problems. We wouldn't have anything to complain about. They would have kept it under the rug. And I want the new council to really understand that. This is first time in 14 years where, and I saw it happening last year, and I support our staff. And when the community complains to me about the kind of salaries we're paying, well, many things go through my mind. I guess we got what we paid for. We were so used to mediocre in so many levels that we thought that was the norm, and so we always tried to get everything as cheap as we could, and we tried to hire the people that would work for the least amount of money, that had the least amount of experience. Now we have experienced staff bringing in ideas from other communities where it was like every now and then we'd talk to somebody on an individual basis at maybe an IML conference or somewhere. In fact, 12, 13 years ago, for 3 years in a row, the council supported me going to the shopping center conference out in Vegas, and I personally walked the floors, right, with Paul Rasmussen and others, and we brought in Kohl's, Best Buy, even the White Castle. We brought in the Barnes & Noble and things that didn't quite work out. I think we got 2 bookstores. We probably should have just been happy with 1. Now we have a void that will be filled. Somebody's going to see that, an independent or someone. But so many things are based on population, and I think we've steadied out. Before, everybody was betting on the come that we were going to increase. In fact, we were talking 85,000 population that we were planning for. And thank you again for mentioning how increasing the tax base, the EAV, everything we do as a community for people to invest here is going to help. And I'm still kind of bewildered at how our sales tax seems to be growing. It's not going away. And but I just want to caution all those positions that we saw cut in 08, 09 because they hired too many people. And yes, I do think they cut too deep, but now I see them coming back, and I just am not negative. I'm all positives. But Dave, I don't want to rebut your position. You said what you felt, but I want to try to go after something that I know we can take care of. You mentioned there was no plan for the vehicle fleet, and a few meetings ago I said, well, either you pay at the time that and it wasn't just 10 years ago that we leased. I think we did it 13 years ago, maybe, and 12 years ago a little bit too. You either put the money away if you've got plenty of surplus, or a riverboat, which we don't have. And then you have that to pay cash as you go. And I think we all do this in our personal finances as well. Or you go down to the bank and I bought a new car Saturday. I got it for 1.6%, 72 months. I mean, I know we can do that as a city. I could do it. And I didn't put any money down. I just went to the dealer and they looked up my credit score, whatever I needed. And so I know we don't have to put that money away. The question I'm asking is, and you don't have to answer it right now, but whatever amount we were paying in that lease, what could we get if we bonded over 7 years with a local bank, or in fact, I think it was Bank of America gave me the loan through one of the dealers. What could we, if we could take that dollar amount and divide it out over 72 months, are we going to get all of our fleet that we need? And I'm hoping you're going to say that we'll have a bunch of extra money left over, and we can put that aside, so eventually, 7 years or 14 years from now, they'll have that fund set aside.
I think the best way I would address answering that question is, unless we had a plan for 10 years from now as to how to fund the vehicles 10 years from now, we'll be in the same situation 10 years from now that we are in today. And unless there is either a reduction somewhere else in the budget or an additional revenue source, that's the only way that you deal with it. And the concern is with a $10 million fleet, the concern is that would just create additional problems by going down the same route. A certain amount needs to be spent. The question is, when do you want to spend that, or how do you want to spend that? If the direction of the council is to look at lease purchase, I mean, we'd come back and provide that, we'd look at it critically. I just think, as we've discussed this internally as staff, the concern is, how do we not repeat the mistakes of the past 10 years in the future?
Well, a lease is going to be expensive, but when interest rates were 6-8%, it was the best alternative. But they're like under 2%. So just buy it, bond it, borrow the money, make the payment. I mean, if we need 10 vehicles and we can only afford to buy one, leverage that. That payment for that one will make the payments on the 10. I mean, I talked the council into doing it the last time because we had to, or raise taxes. I don't want to raise taxes. I want to just work with what we've got. But that's just my position, and the council doesn't have to listen to me. It's just an alternative.
We can take another look at staff and critically analyze a lease purchase and come back at a future point in time.
I don't want to do a lease purchase, just outright purchase and borrow the money at the bank.
Oh, an outright purchase, not a
Yes.
lease purchase?
Yeah, the same way I did on Saturday in my own personal life.
Okay.
Alderman Fanouken.
Well, I think that would address, say, the 10 vehicles this year, but then if you do the same next year, you would continue to pay that off. I'll just use my experience from the university, that we always paid cash for the vehicles and didn't have any credit costs because of that. Even at a low percentage interest rate, there's still additional costs that incurred for vehicles. I don't believe that's necessarily the best way to go. Having said that, we do, however, need to solidify some kind of a plan for future fleet purchases, how that's going to be funded, where that's going to come from. And, maybe it's something that we take a look at entirely in terms of how the departments that are using the vehicles are paying for the use of those vehicles. I know they pay for upkeep, I know they pay for gas, but they really don't have an investment per se in the purchase of those vehicles of their own. And because of that, that ownership's not there, so maybe they're not necessarily, and I'm not saying this across the board here, they're maybe not necessarily taken care of as well as they could be either, because there's no investment in that department or from that department. Again, that's not to say that's across the board, because I know there's some vehicles that are very well taken care of. So I just think that going out and borrow money to do that is not how we want to do it.
Chairman Bevel.
A couple of points. Number one, nobody wants to pay higher taxes or fees, and nobody wants to vote for higher taxes or fees. Okay, but that makes a presumption, though, that I think the facts that we've been presented with in this budget cycle support some revenue enhancement for two particular purposes. One, we have a water user fee structure, or we have a water fee structure. Okay? It is obvious to me from the information that we've seen that the current water fees are insufficient to provide for the long-term sustainability of the water system. So it's hard to defend raising taxes or fees, but on the other hand, the alternative in the case of your water system is to let it deteriorate, and that will be a higher cost in the long term, including a reduction in housing values and a reduction in the attractiveness of the community. So we have to make sure that those particular taxes or fees that are being dedicated to paying for a particular service, that we've accurately priced that service. And, you know, we can talk about the details of that. The second thing is that when engineer Laskowski made his presentation about the streets, this may be an opinion that no one else holds, but I'm not afraid of that. It would seem to me that based on the information that Mr. Laskowski provided, that one could argue that our garbage rates are not covering the full cost of garbage services, in the sense that the garbage trucks could reasonably be believed to be contributing to the deterioration of our streets. That garbage service is necessary, but we certainly haven't built in anything for the sustainability of that service when we have to have streets, either build them at a different kind of weight standard, or we have to price into the cost of the service the fact that running the garbage trucks is costing us in terms of street maintenance. Now, there are a lot of issues that are raised, and I realize that's a very complex issue because there are a lot of users of the city streets who don't use the waste management services through the city of DeKalb. So, I mean, I know that there's a lot of issues there, but we have to at least consider that the services that we've agreed to pay, and I haven't heard anybody saying let's provide lower quality water or let the water system deteriorate, and nobody's talked about garbage service other than, you know, the cost. We have to make sure that we're covering our costs.
City manager.
Yeah, I just wanted to notify the committee and the council after the last meeting when the garbage rates came up. I went back and looked at the solid waste agreement that we have with Waste Management. Our current 5-year agreement expires, I believe, August 31st of 2017. So what I would recommend is a little over a year from now is start revisiting this with the city council, start looking at policy issues as to where you want to go. But as far as the rates, we would be locked in for the next 2 years. There is, I believe, a 2-year extension on that agreement, but staff would be seeking policy direction next year at about this time, maybe July or August, so that we know how to proceed forward in either doing an RFQ, RFP. There's all different options of how you can handle a contract moving forward.
But the rate that is in the contract doesn't have to be the rate that's charged to consumers. That was the point that I was making. If we have to put something in there for the streets, because they certainly are not including it, and they don't need to.
Alderman Baker.
I would agree with Chairman Peddle. Going back to the water, if the council picks one of the scenarios which seems to be necessary, I would want it labeled quite clearly on the water bill that this is a capital replacement fund fee or something to that effect, and know that that money actually is going to be used for that. And so anything that comes up as far as user fees that the council decides to work on capital replacement, have that labeled clearly so that everyone in future councils know and that money follows through. Getting back to
That's it, just for looking.
the question, how much do we need to spend on our fleet? I'll wait for the city manager, that's a question for. How much money do we actually need to replace the fleet if everybody got their wish as far as the cars? And I mean, I heard $10 million over the next 10 years or something crazy.
If we caught up this fiscal year with, if you based it on useful life and the depreciation and replacement value based on the purchase price, it would be over $6 million. And then annually to fund that fleet and equipment was about $1.5 to $1.8 million annually to keep up with it.
And how much of that $6 million are we proposing to spend right now? What do we have towards it?
But in the capital fleet and equipment fund, 470,470. So less than $500,000.
This is not as simple as it was 10 years ago. Is this because we need a particularly large expenditure of?
It's mostly because we've just deferred purchasing our fleet and equipment over the last several years.
Well, I mean, one thing that the council may want to consider, and I'm sure that Chairman Peddle might jump out of his chair, but when we had 25% in the reserve fund balance, basically the checking account balance to make sure checks clear, the only reason that we were told that we needed to be there is that if there were something that stopped the economy and the sales tax didn't come through or the state stopped giving us money, we'd be able to clear the checks for a couple of months. But you know, we're home rule. If something comes up, we can always tax to fix that problem if we had to. We don't need to have that, in my opinion, that fund reserve balance up to 25%. It's just a policy that we decided to adopt when we got down to zero. We didn't need to get to zero. That was irresponsible. But you don't have to go to the bank and borrow money. You can borrow it from our own fund balance and just keep the counting clear. But I don't know how we're going to fix $6 million. I don't have that answer.
A couple of things to address your point, Alderman Baker. Number one, as far as GFOA practice, I think they generally, the Government Finance Officers Association recommends being in that, somewhere in that range. As staff, we would recommend staying fiscally conservative and building up that fund balance and getting back to the 25%. So, and the reason that municipalities do that is for various reasons. If there's a recession, so that you have the cash flow to be able to pay payroll. More importantly, a good example is Fairdale, is a tornado. If the tornado hit DeKalb instead of Fairdale, we would be utilizing those funds right now for overtime for police, fire, and public works, and to purchase equipment or to rent vehicles, you name it. So our recommendation on the most conservative path would be to not touch the fund balance, to continue to build it up so that if there is an emergency, those reserve funds are there. If the council and the Finance Advisory Committee wants to change that threshold and decrease it from 25%, that's a policy issue. What I've seen in municipalities is 25% is generally the low end of the spectrum. As you move further east, you have some communities that are at the 33% to 50% threshold.
I still see only one answer, and that's a vehicle sticker annual fee. That's the only new money that I've ever seen in 14 years that many communities make a lot of money. And we're watching our fleet rust right off the frame. You know, these problems are getting exponential.
I'd be happy to, do some research and come up with some statistics on vehicle sticker revenue of surrounding communities. I can bring it back when we talk about revenues.
I think we have 27,000 vehicles. $35 would do it. But previous staff has always just come back without supporting documentation, and I know you won't do that, and said, "Oh, it's $350,000 to administer. It's too much trouble, and who wants to scrape those off in January when it's cold?" Well, fine, do it in July.
Chair Peddle.
Two things. First of all, there may be 27,000 vehicles in the city
That's registered to the city of DeKalb. That would be ticketable if not
That's
registered.
27,000 registered
Every
in
time
the
we-
city of DeKalb?
Every time under Chief Fython that we ask for that number, that's what we got. And there's laser readers in Chicago. It's the biggest money that the police down there make, and I got that direct from Chicago police officers. They have scanners. They go down the streets or parking lots, and they scan those license plates. When they find a plate between midnight and 5 a.m. when they've got time, they find a plate that doesn't have a sticker, but it's registered to the city, they just write a ticket, $350 or whatever it is.
Okay. With respect to the issue of the fund balance, one of the things that's happened over the last few years, and there was an article in the Tribune yesterday on the front page about how there's new criteria that are being used for bond ratings, and I would encourage you to take a look at it, because it's kind of scary for all Illinois municipalities, because they're starting to consider fund balances, pension obligations, all things that were not included before. And in fact, you may have heard that that Chicago, or the public schools, I don't remember which one, was lowered to junk bond status. If they had used the criteria that they used before, they would not have been downgraded. So that was entirely due to changes in the way that they do the bond ratings, and your reserves are part of that. So, I think, there is a balancing act. I think everything has to be on the table. I do agree with that. I have a position, and it's probably not the same as Dave Baker's, but that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be considered, and that doesn't mean that we shouldn't explore every possibility and make policy decisions based on what's best for the city itself as well as its citizens.
We're 2 hours plus into our discussion this evening. I'd like to ask city manager additional information that needs to be presented tonight.
Yes.
And then let's talk about next steps toward June 8th.
Yes. To give an overview, and then I'm going to turn it over to Director Haley. As I look at the agenda, and we were dealing with C, wrap-up and final recommendations, I think at this point it would be beneficial for Director Haley to go over the discussion on long-term liabilities, and this would ultimately be part of the final recommendation, as well as an overview of the GFOA budget award program, so that the committee, council, and community is aware of how the budget is being put together and what will be coming forward, not only June 8th, but moving forward and presenting to the GFOA. F and G, as far as review financial policy changes and additions and review purchasing manual, can be delayed, so depending on time or how long you want to go. But ultimately, what staff would be seeking after discussion on the long-term liabilities and the GFOA budget award program is really looking at the general fund and the other funds for fiscal year 16 is what do you want in the budget, what do you want pulled out of the budget, and we would seek direction. So at that point, Director Haley, if you can go through the long-term liabilities.
Okay, so this sparked out of a discussion with council. So I provided a couple other long-term liabilities that we have on our books that I think I just want you to be made aware of, and some recommendations that staff has to address them. So if you look at the letter, there is a letter in your packet, long-term liabilities. There are 4 of them that I want to address. One has to be paid. It's an IMRF obligation, so it goes back to, if you recall, the employer deferred contribution to several of our employees that is made to a deferred compensation plan. We did come back and say that was needed to be taxed, FICA and Medicare. We did do that. We corrected that issue going back to January of 2013. We did our W-2Cs. We did all that, and then come to find out that those benefits that the city contributes for these employees it's considered IMRF wages. So we need to pay into IMRF for these wages, and that's also going back to January 2013, month by month, that's about $54,000. So that will, I mean, that still is within the budget amount of the $541,000, leaving about $123,000 in that line item budget. So with that taken out, there's three other long-term liabilities that are sitting there on the books. One is the comp time balances that are remaining after the pay and comp study. That was what was discussed during the pay and comp study conversation. Right now, that balance is about $406,532. We have some vacation balances that are on the books that happened when a union employee was promoted to a non-bargaining unit. The way that the vacation policy is written, they kept their current vacation balance and then they were given their full amount of vacation up front as a non-bargaining unit employee. So they have a lot of vacation sitting on the books that they're probably not going to use. That's the $88,627. But the one that I think is more important, or most important at this point, in my opinion, is the net IMRF and IMRF pension obligation. This was a comment on our management letter for the audit back in, I think it was 2009. IMRF's rate was skyrocketing, and they gave cities or municipalities the option to either take their lump hit and take that rate increase or spread it out over time. The city decided to defer that payment. And in doing so, we've got this liability sitting on our books that IMRF graciously increases by 7.5% every year. So it's an increasing liability by 7.5%, which is a pretty big percentage. So I think that's important to get paid off, and staff would recommend paying that off in FY16 and use the $350,000 that's in the budget in the general fund support regular salaries currently. And if you recall, that regular salary line item is typically meant for people leaving the city for vacation payout or, when they leave. So that would still leave some of those dollars remaining in fiscal 16. And then kind of monitor the comp time balance. It is naturally going to go down, but we would monitor that throughout the course of fiscal 16. And if there's money remaining of the $350,000, we could come back with a recommendation to pay some of that down as well at that time. And then again, I'm not sure if I mentioned the $88,000, I think we would recommend paying off in fiscal 15. So those are our long-term liabilities.
So for the net pension obligation, that's already included in the 26.
It is
16
not.
budget? It's not included.
No, well, it's not included, but we do have a $350,000 budgeted, so we
we
would
could take care of
recommend
that.
taking it out of that budget line item.
Okay.
And not overspend that number?
And not overspend that number, so monitor that number throughout the year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alderperson Noriko.
Are you aware of staff who do have significant vacation or comp time balances such that if they would leave, it would really jeopardize this remaining $145,000?
I'm looking at Bob back there. We do have staff. The comp time balance was reduced significantly through the pay and comp study process, but we do have staff that have 450 to 480 hours on the books with comp time. Whether they're close to retirement or leaving, I'm not sure.
One of the things to address your question is we could work with the department heads to identify if there's any employees that we think could be leaving by the end of June 30th of 2016 through retirements or otherwise, and be able to look at what that obligation is and set that aside. I know when Director Haley and I met to review this, one way that we address this is as an example for the vacation balance. If the direction of the council would be to draw down the vacation balance for the remaining $541,000 that's been allocated in fiscal year 15, our recommendation would be to wait until June 30th, and let's see whether we have anybody leave between now and June 30th, and then on June 30th, be able to draw that down, first with the vacation balances, and then second, with the comp time balance. And then fast forward to fiscal year 16, the first priority of the $350,000 that would be budgeted would be the net IMRF pension obligation. And we would do the same thing to fast forward towards the end of next fiscal year to see if there are any other payouts of employees that have left. And then whatever remaining is to continue to draw down the comp time balance. Alternatively, if we were to find out, working with the department heads, that we had an expectation of a number of retirements that was going to draw that down, we would then bring that back to the council and probably modify the recommendation.
Yeah, I would feel more comfortable taking a look at it if you did have, you know, at least an approximation of, you know, people who are close to retirement age, have given some indication. Knowing that you're never going to be able to hit it exactly, but, you know.
Chair Pennell?
Two things. Number one, not to beat a dead horse, but this is something that a human resources director could help us with. But the larger point is that one of the things that a lot of organizations have done, and you would have probably a 2-year phase-in, is to change your policy with respect to vacation and comp time carryover. You give people a warning to use up, and what you're really doing is you're simply reducing your future liability. I mean, you are going to have to deal with covering the absences of the people that have built that up. But there is some reasonable middle ground where you can also simultaneously to financing some of this change policies and give people some time to adjust to the new limits.
And to address that, staff is working on putting together a personnel manual and a benefits handbook. And the goal would be changing some of those, specifically how vacation is given right now for non-bargaining unit employees. When you start employment, you get it all at one lump sum time. So if you start January 1st, you're getting whatever the amount of vacation time you're getting at one time. And this is what's created part of the problem, as Director Haley was talking about, when you have a bargaining unit employee that's then being promoted into a non-bargaining unit position. Our recommendation moving forward with the adoption of the manual and the handbook as of January 1st, 2016, is to change to an accrual basis. So every pay period, you're accruing. So we don't have a situation that someone starts on January 1st, gets their lump sum amount of vacation and leaves February 1st and is able to cash that out. So that would be a recommendation, definitely moving forward. When you look at the amount with the comp time and the vacation balances, these are obligations that the city has that we have to be able to provide for. But the other thing I want to point out is the issue. You know, Chief Lowry was talking earlier about some of the operational issues that you have in relation to overtime or calls or when people are out. We have employees who have significant vacation balances that essentially can't use that time, and it creates an operational difficulty, I know, in particular in the police department. So drawing down these vacation balances is an important thing in order to be able to provide better operations in our larger departments. You want to go on to the next item?
GFOA.
Yeah.
And then just quickly, this,
Sorry.
Did you have a comment?
I was just gonna say, pay it and be done with it. Let's get it off the books, use the money for other stuff that will benefit the city. You know, we owe this, let's pay it, be done.
And that's
7.5% is ridiculous to be charged, but
Mike,
Do
you're
it.
supporting Anne Marie's suggested logic of looking at FY15
Yeah.
as a first priority, vacation balance, then comp
Well,
time balance.
The NPO or the IMRF, get rid of that.
Sure.
Just get it off the books, let's be done with it.
And just to be specific, as Director Haley has pointed out, the $204,200 for the net IMRF pension obligation has to be paid at one time. And because we only have $123,000 left on the fiscal year 15, that's why we would be recommending taking that out of fiscal year 16, but drawing down that remainder $123,911 that's in fiscal year 15 and using that to pay for the vacation balances first, and then drawing down the comp time balances second.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense to get rid of that IMRF balance.
Okay.
Alderperson O'Leary.
Is there anything else on the books that we need to know about? Is there anything else?
Not that we know right now.
Okay, all right, okay.
I mean,
I'll keep looking, though.
Okay.
when we discover things, we're bringing them to you as soon as we discover them.
Thank you.
So the GFOA budget model this year, we are working towards submitting the budget for fiscal year 16 to the Government Finance Officers Association award program. Following this model not only follows best practices in financial presentation, but will result in a superior document that is clearer, it's easier to understand, it's more comprehensive than previous budgets that the city has adopted and presented, and I think it's friendlier for the residents to read. So you will receive, hopefully, an electronic copy on June 8th that will have a large portion of what this budget will look like. We have 90 days to incorporate, after the budget is adopted, any additional graphs or write-ups or memos to that budget model. Of course, the numbers wouldn't change, but you will receive an electronic copy by June 8th. So.
Kathy? I think it might be helpful for the council and maybe for the citizens to put it in the packet, but if you could provide, go to the gfoa.org website, and there is the score sheet for use for evaluating a budget, which is only one page.
Oh, it is?
It's only one page, yeah. And if it was, a big document, I would, but it's one page. And I would suggest that it might be informational as to what the criteria are. And then you can see why it might be a good idea to do it.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Anything else, Director Henry?
I think we've covered everything.
Okay. What I'd like to do is ask council to focus back on the initial wrap-up memo that we received this evening, which outlines the staffing items, the new requests that are in the FY16 budget draft that we have, focusing primarily on general fund recommendations that you'd like to make to staff as they prepare the FY16 draft for June 8th. Alderman Fanouken.
I noticed that with the two proposed positions that they're split funded between GF and water, I want to know why none of it is charged off to the airport fund too, because they're obviously going to work for airport also.
There are several expenditures that we could probably incorporate into the airport fund. I think it'll be part of our analysis when we go in depth with what's currently hitting the airport fund, what revenue sources that are available that maybe the airport can start charging. So we will be doing an in-depth analysis of the airport fund, both revenue side and expenditure side.
And I think both of you are aware that I'm a proponent of those enterprise funds paying for those costs that they're creating. So.
Absolutely.
So good point. So the suggestion is look at that airport enterprise fund sharing
Yep.
those costs. Thank you. Other comments, suggestions, items you'd like to see incorporated or changed relative to the general fund. Alderman Snow.
Getting back to the positions, I mean, although as much as I would like to have 2 new positions, I think at most I can support 1 position. And that's still dependent upon what the state does. So I think, in my own mind, there's no way I can support 2 positions. 1 position I'm willing to still consider.
Which one do you like better?
And that would be the human resource position. I thought about it both ways, and I guess I accept staff's recommendation that maybe HR is the first priority. I do think when you hire the right people and have the right tools available, it helps the organization in the long run. It's been mentioned a couple times here, if you don't hire the right people and have good policies, it costs you money in the long run. And I think not having a good HR director position to create those policies has probably hurt us in the long run. So I think that one would still be on the table for me, but I think for now, the IT position would have to be set aside because of the uncertainties of income.
Bob, would you agree to see the HR position in the budget draft with the IT position as a scenario 1A, or an incremental scenario, or somehow deal with that position in a queue?
Yeah, I mean, I realize the position is still important. I'm still unclear as to what to do with IT and the contractual services that might be recommended to kind of evaluate our IT position. I do think technology is something that the city has to get ahead of the curve on. You get behind the curve on IT and technology, you start falling further and further behind. So it is something we need to look at. It's tough to cut expenses. I will note over the last 3 years that I've been involved in the budget process, there has been no tax increase. In fact, in real dollars, every citizen has paid less on their property tax bill to the city of DeKalb than they did 3 years ago, because there have been no inflationary increases whatsoever. There's been no increase in the sales tax. Yes, are we looking at potential increases? We're looking at them. We may not do any of them. I don't know. So citizens have not been hit with paying more for their services over the last 3 years. That the increase in services has been paid by new revenue from other sources. So I don't know. I'm open to suggestions. I'm just saying that I know that I can't right now support the second position as is.
City manager.
So alternate options to the position as is: number 1, not fill the position. Number 2, as in the memo presented tonight, budget to do the strategic IT assessment, as well as provide some operational assistance for the IT implementation. Another option, if the council wants to fill the IT director, is defer it towards the end of the fiscal year so that you can see where the city is financially and tie it into the timing, assuming the council wants to move forward on the financial software, so that the IT director is tied into the implementation of that. But if the council's not interested in the IT director at this time, an alternate option is the strategic IT assessment.
Alderperson Noriko.
I would assume that an assessment, be it an independent assessment, IT assessment, or by an IT director, would have to be done before purchase and implementation of the I-9 Verify software, the agenda program, applicant tracking. I've probably missed some other, the financial software, so,
So I think the largest of those is the financial software. The I-9 E-Verify, I know Patty Hoppenstead has a lot of familiarity with. That could probably be incorporated without
fairly
an
easily.
IT director.
Right, and that's in the cloud system, so it's not
Okay.
something that would be supported by our servers.
Oh, okay.
It's something that the company, the vendor, supports it, they maintain it,
Okay.
they do the upgrades, and that's part of that system.
Okay, so that doesn't really need any
No, that
kind
does
of
not
other
need
assessment or anything?
Specific IT skill set. We just need to, which I have implemented that system in the past. The applicant tracking system, again, that's an in-the-cloud-based system. It is not on our servers. It's maintained by the vendor. They do the upgrades and so on. The enterprise system, which Kathy will speak to, it does tie into the needs for an IT professional.
And I think depending on the direction, we can certainly start the RFP process for the financial software. I've been through 2 of those myself. I know Bob's written an RFP for new financial software and get that process started, because that takes a long time as well. But again, it depends on the direction.
So conceivably, depending upon when you started that process and who started it, the actual dollar hit for the system could potentially be in fiscal year 17 then.
For the financial software?
Uh-huh.
Again, depending on what's recommended with the IT position, we could either defer that budgeted item or budget it in this fiscal 16 year and then do a carryover budget amendment if it was started and it didn't get all expended in this fiscal year. So maybe it started at the very end of the fiscal year. Or if it didn't get started, it could still be a carryover dollar amount into the next fiscal year.
I would add, I think the reality of the situation, by the time that you write the RFP, distribute the RFP, interview the potential applicants, and then make a recommendation to the council and then start implementing it, we're at least into the second half of the fiscal year, probably into somewhere into calendar year 2016.
Alderperson O'Leary.
What about the pothole filler truck? Is that in, have we budgeted for that? The, whatever truck,
Mark,
was-
what exactly do you need? How much will it
what is
cost?
that truck called?
That machine is it's a heated patch mix trailer. You put the patch mix that we fill the potholes in, and it's got a diesel burner that heats it up to 160 degrees, and that way in the wintertime you can actually shovel it. The cost of that replacement was about $24,000.
Is that truck in there now?
No, we believe that is not in the budget. That's one of those items that would be covered by the fleet and equipment. And when trying to keep the costs as low as possible, that was one of the items that was not recommended.
Alderman Baker.
Well, I think you have 2 council people that want their wards fixed first with that truck, and we're looking for, and who's ever opposed, you can do their wards last. So, that's the way politics used to be back in the day, guys,
And if
before me.
If the direction of the council is to put it in, we can put it in.
You just got directed.
Yes, can we put it in?
Didn't we just direct? I don't see anybody saying their ward doesn't want the
Yes.
potholes fixed. So that's how it's done. Okay, gosh, I lost my train of thought. As far as the IT and the HR position, what I haven't heard talk about that was floated quite a lot 10 to 14 years ago was outsourcing the HR. Right now would be the time to talk about that because we don't have an actual HR director. I'm not saying the whole department, but certainly the expertise of keeping up with the latest and a consulting type basis, maybe someone to come in to take care of, like for instance, when we had an interim city attorney that showed up 1 or 2 days a week. Maybe that's something to consider. I don't know if that's the answer, but I just haven't heard it floated. Because in IT, the efficiencies of software and industrial technology, they don't just eliminate the need for more employees, but they make things so much more streamlined and better for the community. And that's where I think we need some fresh blood and some fresh eyes. Although I'm torn here because I don't want to support both positions blanket because I don't think I have enough information. But I think we need to really take a close look at what we're going to do in IT and follow up with more software investment, whatever it takes to fix the the obsolete stuff that we're having to limp by with.
I can address your question and speak from personal experience, and then I'll ask Assistant City Manager Patty Hoppenstead to add anything on the HR side. Between the two, the trends I've seen in local government is not in contracting out HR, but in contracting out IT. We're having some type of hybrid or blend between in-house staff and contracting out. I can tell you, having worked in Montgomery, it was a smaller municipality, we did not have any in-house staff. We contracted it out entirely. On the HR side, also, I've seen both directions, speaking from my previous experience in Montgomery, of having in-house staff and contracting it out. What I saw in the contracting out is you couldn't always get an answer immediately. You ended up paying very similar to how it's set up in some municipalities with legal, where you might be paying the actual time spent. I think you could probably set up a contract where it's a blanket amount. The issue that I see in HR is that in comparison to police, fire, and public works, which are external departments that really service the needs of the community and the residents, you have HR and IT are your internal service departments. So HR is really the department, the service they're providing is to be there for the employees, or to be there for the supervisors, or to be there for the department heads when they're managing, whether it's a personal injury, a work comp situation, providing training. So as staff, we could take a closer look, but at this point, it's more beneficial with the needs that we have and what I've seen in my 16-plus months here. I guess I'm going on maybe longer than that. The need is to have the internal. The mayor alluded to it earlier. When it comes time for open enrollment for our retirees, we're not able to address their questions in a timely manner with the 1.5 staff members that we have. So it comes to service delivery and the business model of how you want to provide the service. And the other thing is, I would also suggest, I know Alderman Norrico has experience on the HR side as far as what she's seen as far as experience or practice.
I guess I'd like to say I support Alderman Snow's position of the HR taking the priority. The IT certainly investigate some more options, including possibly outsourcing specialists to come in and help us with what we need to get back on track or get on track. But I keep the options open for what we do with IT, but I think unless we hear it from everyone else differently, at least the HR should go ahead with.
And I would certainly support keeping HR in-house. I think in addition to the ability to respond more quickly to questions, it's useful to have that presence, that people, an individual that people trust, respect, so that employees feel comfortable coming forward with issues at a point at which they can be dealt with in-house versus feeling the need to go outside, be it, to other legal sources. And so HR really can help prevent issues from escalating. And also really helping the city manager understand the morale and the tenor of the organization.
Thank you. Other comments on the general fund items you'd like to see or deleted from a budget draft? Others?
I'll defer to others, then I'll come back to me.
Alderman Marquardt.
I'm definitely for having a in-house HR. The outsourcing of that has driven me nuts in other places, so that definitely. And I am probably 90% in favor of having the IT in-house as well. Just because in the same way, IT, technology and computers are such a part of everything that we do that contracting that out cuts that response time. You know, if your computer is down, you got to call somebody, well, then you're calling somebody in to do that function, and there's a time lag. There could be critical issues, you know, with fire, police, in that situation as well. So having that person in-house, I'm 90% convinced that it needs to be in this budget to do. I don't like not having it and then spending other money to tell us things that we possibly already know or can put together with somebody who's on staff. And I think if it works in this budget as being, and I'm going to use it again, somewhat balanced because there's play in everything as we go forward, I think it should be included. Now, if the state comes through and they drop all this, well, then obviously we're going to have to make some other decisions, and you're not hiring somebody tomorrow or next month or anything. So we have some time frame where if the state part goes away and we're faced with that, well then, yeah, I guess we make do. Sorry, Patty. We make do, and that's what we do. You know, I think staff is fully aware of that's what we would do, and that's what, if the money is only there for that, then that's what we do. But I think we go forward with properly staffing the city so that we can provide the services that are necessary so that we can support people and provide those services, you know, that we need. Unfortunately, our streets, we have to figure out something, and that's not going to be decided with this budget. It's going to be down the line. But, so, there's my 2 cents. Mark, send me an email tomorrow.
Alderman Baker.
Mark, did you need anything besides a patch trailer, like a crack filling trailer, maybe?
Well, if you're asking, I'm going to tell you the truth. I requested a plow truck for Section 2 that's, you know, we call it Christine. The truck broke down 9 times last winter. It's beyond the realm of repair. We've patched it. We put it back together. The truck is unreliable. And that would absolutely be on my #1 list.
And you need that truck to pull the patching trailer, right?
At times, yes, sir.
I can see the staff's getting upset with me. I wanted, for those paying attention to what I'm doing, there used to be no ward system like we have now. And I think it was up there off of North First Street, Tilton Park. There were 3 or 4 council people that lived within 3 or 4 blocks, and they got new streets every couple of years. And, you know, that's why they created the ward system, to spread us out throughout the community, so that when something like a patch trailer got deleted, like it had to, but Monica and I were alert enough to request that our wards be taken care of first, and you can do evenly over the rest. But
Clearly, Dave, let me just emphasize that I confirmed with City Manager Gora, those fleet needs would be prioritized within a fleet replacement policy that council will be considering, and that staff has highlighted among those capital funds. So further, we saw the red marks on that fleet replacement schedule. You know, we've got multiple needs across the fleet, and those will be prioritized.
I appreciate you and the staff putting up with my jovial nature here. I was just trying to bring a spotlight on the fact that it's not just the plow trucks we need. We've got to
Absolutely.
figure this out.
Absolutely.
But thank God we got a patch trailer coming, because that is the #1 calls I'm getting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other changes that council would like to see, and as you're thinking about that, Chair Petal, you'll be solidifying FAC recommendations toward that June 8th.
Yes, I'll talk to Finance Director and City Manager about our plans.
Thank you. Other discussion? Tom?
Just so I'm clear, the intent is to get a set of recommendations prior to the 8th, is that? so that
That's-
they can
that's
be
correct.
written up.
And I'd suggest work from the current draft that we have, the
Yeah,
documents.
the
we have
recommendations
tonight.
that we talked about.
Right. Okay, is there further direction council would like to give staff toward that budget draft?
I just
Alderman
need
Noriko.
another clarification. Under the capital fleet and equipment fund, is the HR software recruitment basically the applicant tracking? Okay.
Alderman O'Leary, I recall our meeting tonight was scheduled at your request. Other council members supported the need to do this wrap up. Are there further areas or questions that need to be addressed in your mind?
I have on here voicemail. I'm not sure, I heard someone talk about voicemail in one of these meetings. What is the voicemail for? What is the?
The
I don't know.
voicemail messaging.
I know what that is.
Okay.
Chief Lowry had mentioned that police officers are not reachable. There's no voicemail system for somebody to leave a message for a police officer, and that rather it's going through the 911 and the dispatcher system.
Okay. No, that's pretty much it.
Okay.
So
Well-
So how do we fix that voicemail problem?
that was a future IT item that we were trying to address. It's on our list of issues.
That the IT director
Yes.
would be.
I mean, yes.
It's pending.
We're also addressing that within this fiscal year, that's a problem whose solution's in progress, along with the answering system that we're getting implemented, but that's not a cost item that we're looking at for FY17.
I got one more question. About that, the water main system, and we had the different scenarios. So we didn't go back over that.
The water stuff.
The water,
Oh, the water, that's a good point.
And if you want to provide direction tonight, we can. The consultants, Burns McDonald, had put together scenario 1A, so it's your choice if you want to go in depth into that tonight. An alternate option is to have us schedule a meeting in July to bring back those engineers from Burns and McDonald, so that if you have specific technical questions like you did at the previous Saturday morning meeting, they would be here to be able to address those. There is no immediate need for the council to take action on where you want to go with the water rate. We did not tie any revenue increased assumptions into the fiscal year 16 budget, but we would recommend getting direction one way or the other early into the fiscal year, so that if the council, whether you go with status quo or not status quo, we would have adequate time to let the public know in advance of just how the cycle works with the water billing.
Okay. So is that clear, Monica? There's no
yes.
revenue change based on water rate changes in this budget draft? But our intent would be to come back to that in the July timeframe.
And that's because of the money coming from the state. We don't know how that's gonna work out.
LGDF reduction would not impact the general fund or the water fund. The LGDF reduction really is going to have the greatest impact on the general fund. So what we would do is any new item, whether it was staff, equipment, fleet, technology, we would not purchase any of that until there was action taken in Springfield. And if there is any reduction, then we come back to the council with our plan of action as to how we would deal with that reduction.
Those water rate adjustments would be dealing with the $1 million a year need for water infrastructure,
Right.
Ryan, that Burns and McDonald we have put in front of us.
Yeah, that's correct. 2016 budget doesn't have any water main replacement. And so the rates themselves that Burns and Mac was recommending were tied more to water main replacement, future water main replacements. For FY16, we don't have that scheduled, so there isn't an immediate need to, I guess, make a decision on that, but obviously we'll need some direction at some point.
And Director Haley, didn't the option 1A that the City Council and Finance Advisory Committee requested, hasn't that been provided to the City Council already?
Yeah,
So
I was
you,
looking at it. Yeah, I was
okay,
looking at it.
so I just wanted to make sure you have that to review and consider.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, I was talking with Director DeVita over there, and I really do like the ideas that she have for the downtown with the upper, the apartment areas. I did like those ideas as well, that we had talked about previously. We just need so much, and I understand you all inherit all these problems. You come into these positions with what's going on with the city of DeKalb. I just want to make sure that we are not just trying to overtax the people, and that we'll be more conservative with our spending and just not just spend or try to find something else to do outside of just spending. That's all.
I'd like to just reinforce comments that have been made, complimenting staff on the transparency that we've seen in this year's budget process. I'd like to encourage continued radical questioning to launch fresh and creative realms. I know City Manager Gore, it wasn't easy to float other revenue sources, tax increases, but you were willing to bite the bullet and take a stand in terms of shortfall in revenues as we look out the next 5 years. And I think it's an area that I would just strongly encourage. Continue to break out of limiting and erroneous assumptions. Let go of those. Continue healthy, productive thinking about risk-taking, fear and failure. But take those risks, put in front of us transparent information that we can make reasonable judgments with. So I compliment staff on where we are, encourage you to continue going forward in this direction. Other comments this evening? Alderman
And,
Noriko.
again, as someone new to this process, and also someone who hasn't built her career on building budgets, a huge amount of information was made as clear as possible. And, staff has been very accessible in terms of answering questions, no matter how embarrassed I might have been asking them. So, yes, just an incredibly complex issue is really being laid out so that we can make the tough decisions we have to make.
Thank you. And I would just reinforce Director Haley is available over these next 2 weeks. If you have additional questions, please bring those forward as we work toward that final draft scenario. Other discussion, comments this evening? Is there anyone in the public wishing to speak? With that, I will turn to council and ask for a motion to adjourn.
So move.
We're done. Okay. It's been moved by Alderman O'Leary. Is there a second? Seconded by Alderman Noriko. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Please, same sign. Thank you.